Today, we learn what causes guitar strings to break and what you can do to stop it from happening so frequently. This information applies to electric and acoustic guitars. At the end of this video, I'm going to provide you with a tech tip that's going to help you keep that pesky G and B string in tune. Works especially well on those Gibson style headstocks, so make sure you stick around to the end to catch that tip. Strings wear out. Friction from the nut or the frets or the bridge can cause strings to thin at the contact point. These areas harden and become less flexible, making them prone to breakage. The buildup of oils and dirt from your hands accelerates this process. If your strings sound dull, it's a good sign that this is happening and it's time to change them out. But the age and condition of your strings is not the only thing that causes them to break. They can also fail prematurely because of maintenance issues on your instrument. Strings make contact with several friction points. Over time and with repeated use, these areas of the guitar can develop an imperfection known as a burr. A burr is a rough edge that is sharp and it can cut through guitar strings. So if you're breaking strings regularly, this is the reason why. The most common place on the guitar to break a string is at the bridge, and I just happen to have an excellent example to share with you. This is the bridge of a 1957 reissue Stratocaster. The guitar was made in 1986 and it shows significant signs of wear. I was repairing this guitar, and on inspection, I noticed two broken strings. Where they broke in relation to the guitar was the key in helping me to identify what the problem was. When you break a string, pay attention to where on the guitar the string broke. Was it near the nut, the tuning peg, or the bridge? Keep in mind that a string under tension will be longer than a broken string, so the contact point closest to the break is the likely culprit. Now you can do one of two things with this knowledge. Number one, you can attempt to make the repair yourself. Or number two, you can take the guitar down to your favorite tech and tell them where the strings are breaking so that they can look at the problem for you. For the do-it-yourselfers watching, let's look at what to do in this case. As you can see, there's a clear wear pattern where the string makes contact with the saddle. To repair this, all we need is some sandpaper. This example was pretty extreme, so I removed the saddles and moved the saddle height adjustment screws out of the way. It's unlikely that your guitar would be this bad, so generally there's no need to do this. Keep in mind that if you do take the saddles off, you'll need to reset the string height and intonate the guitar, so don't do this unless you're 100% comfortable with those adjustments. I have done a video explaining how to do the intonation on your Stratocaster style guitar, and I'll post a link to the cards here in case you need it. Simply use some sandpaper and sand away the burr. In this case, I started with a rough grit paper because the burr was quite deep and moved to a finer grit to polish the saddle. It doesn't take much, so stop often and check your work. You don't want to overdo it. Another common place for strings to break is at the tuning peg. These areas will also develop burrs, and you'll be able to identify that this is the source of the problem by where the string breaks. For these, you can use a wound string and insert it into the tuning peg. Gently work it back and forth. Visually inspect the peg and check it by touch to ensure that there's no sharp surfaces. I also like to use a very fine sandpaper to push through the slot as a final step. Finally, I buff the outside of the peg with a really fine sandpaper. Keep in mind that if you have colored tuning pegs, sanding them may remove the plating, so don't do this. So if that's the case, skip this step. Another friction point is the string retainers. If you're breaking strings here, again, you can use a wound string to remove the burr. Alternatively, you can remove the string retainer and use a bit of sandpaper to clean this up. Just remember not to over tighten it when you put it back on. The next friction point is the nut. If you're breaking strings here, I again recommend just using a string to work through the slot. Move back and forth and side to side. Use the appropriate string for the slot you want to adjust. For example, don't use your low E string in the high E string slot because you'll widen the slot and potentially ruin the nut. You don't need much, so be careful. You don't want to overdo it. You could also polish this up with some fine sandpaper. Finally, you could have a damaged fret. For this, you might want to take the guitar to a tech and have them address the issue for you. If you make a mistake with your frets, it could lead to some costly repairs.
And now for that string tuning tip. For me, I like to use Big Ben's nut sauce. This stuff works really good when you have strings that are binding in the nut. You'll know you'll have this issue if when turning the tuning peg, you hear a pinging sound. If you hear that, it's a dead giveaway that the string is binding in the nut, and it's the reason why the G and B strings in particular will not stay in tune. And this is particularly true on Gibson style guitars because the way they're designed, they pull the strings off on an angle each way, which I think is just kind of a crappy design. We'll talk about that in a separate video. So it just comes in a little tube like this. There's a couple of different applicators you can get as well. And all we do is remove the cover and just apply a little bit in each of the nut slots just before you string the guitar. You don't need much, just comes out in a little drop. Spread it in the slot, apply your strings, and it's going to work really great. I also use this on the saddles as well.
Now you know why strings break and what you can do to prevent it from happening. If you found the video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel for more useful tips like this. Thanks for watching, and remember, once you know something, nobody can take it away from you. Cheers.